Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's insightful webinar hosted by MSCCB, where we explore ISO IC 42001 and its influence on artificial intelligence. I'm Valona Sülay, the marketing specialist at MSCCB, and I'm delighted to be your host for this session. As I mentioned, today we focus on ISO IC 42001 and its profound influence on AI. ISO IC 42001 provides organizations a structured approach to managing the risks and opportunities associated with AI. It helps organizations balance fostering innovation through AI adoption and implementing effective governance practices. We are privileged to have distinguished experts guiding us through this webinar. Joining us are Mr. Graeme Parker, an esteemed authority in standards development and implementation, and Mr. Roman Krepki, whose expertise bridges MSCCB's commitment to advancing technological integration with global standards. Let me inform you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on MSCCB website for those who are unable to join us live or who wish to revisit the discussion. There will also be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so make sure you submit your questions in the Q&A chat box below. For the questions we cannot cover today, we will respond via email and include them alongside the webinar on our website. As for the webinar agenda, here's what we will cover. We will explore how AI is reshaping compliance with ISO IC 42001. We'll discuss the integration of AI with ISO IC 42001 standard, practical strategies and best practices for integrating AI solutions effectively within this framework, while also examining current industry trends and regulatory requirements that organizations need to navigate. Now, I would like you to introduce you to Mr. Graeme Parker. Hello, Graeme. Thank you for being here with us.
Hi, thank you. And yeah, welcome everybody and thank you for coming along. So my name is Graeme Parker. I'm a lead auditor with MSCCB. I'm based in the United Kingdom, up in the north of England. And a little bit about my background then. So my background primarily focuses on information and cybersecurity, and I've been in that space since around 99, 2000. So going back that far, basically my sort of first security-related role was in networking. So actually I was a network engineer back then, started to specialize in the security aspects, looking at VPNs and intrusion detection, but eventually decided to move more into the management side of security, joined the National Health Service in the UK, where I spent 6 years implementing BS 7799, as it was then, the forerunner to ISO 27001. And then after that, I worked for quite a few large consulting and business process outsourcing organizations in the capacity of being a security consultant. So I spent a lot of time working on security architectures, implementing various standards across the board in the security and compliance field. More recently then, well, since 2008, I've basically been running my own consulting company here in the UK, spending a lot of time again helping clients implement multiple standards. More recently working as well in cloud computing with CSA Star, and over the last couple of years taking a very keen interest in AI. Right now then I split my time really between consulting projects in multiple fields, auditing with MSCCB, so I'm a registered auditor for multiple standards, as you can see on the profile here, now including 42001. And finally, I'm also an instructor as well, so I teach a number of certification courses in the field of ISO standards and security. So that's hopefully a little bit about me, and yeah, I'll get to share some of that information with you during this webinar.
Thank you, Graeme. Now, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Roman Krepki. Hello, Roman. Thank you for being here with us.
Hello, thank you, Valona, for that introduction. And my name is Roman Krepki. I'm a senior manager at a consultancy company named Mazars. This is what is common with me and Graeme. I'm also specialized currently in cybersecurity and risk management. But I'm coming from a slightly different perspective. So I have been studying computer science in Germany, in the nice city of Berlin, and was focusing on the topic of artificial intelligence and neural network algorithmics. So I was developing some artificial intelligence algorithms, especially in the course of brain-computer interfacing. So we were analyzing electroencephalographic currents of the brain and applying a neural network, an artificial neural network to those data and trying to control a pattern or control a computer game for that. What's really funny, really interesting project. And yeah, when I was done with that, then changed to the field area of cybersecurity, worked for some consultancy companies, and then joined to the company of Bosch, where I was a security engineer and I was a data protection officer. Finally, working as a central department of them for data security, information security, and data protection matters. Currently with MSECB as a auditor, management system auditor, as a auditor in various standards like ISO 27001, risk management 27005, also business continuity management like 22301. I'm CMSA, CISSP, business continuity professional, and also data protection officer. Yeah, and very curious about the new, just recently issued AI Act from the European Union, and even more curious in the new ISO norm 42001, also focusing on the topics how you can integrate these both items, the law and the standard. And very excited to on the questions now. And yeah, let's start.
Thank you, Roman. Now let's move on to the main part of the webinar. We have prepared some questions to discuss together with Roman and Graeme. Start with the first one. So what is the link between the European Union AI Act recently agreed upon and issued by the European Commission and the international standard ISO IC 42001?
Yeah, so I guess if you want me to jump in there a little bit, so yeah, it's quite interesting because when you look at the EU AI Act, basically it has a number of key requirements in there, particularly around what they would consider to be high-risk systems, and there's a kind of a definition of various high-risk systems. You know, those systems that might operate critical infrastructure, those that might be used in education and training, law enforcement, and various other fields. And one of the key requirements of the Act is basically that organisations, before they bring those products to market, are meant to conduct quite a comprehensive impact assessment, essentially. There are also some other requirements in the Act about transparency. So even for something like ChatGPT, which is not considered in the Act to be a high-risk system because it's generative AI, there's some transparency requirements. And so when you look at a lot of the requirements in the EU AI Act, ISO 42001 gives us a management system, if you like, to manage many of the risks and issues that the Act is trying to get an organisation to address. So the Act doesn't specifically say an organisation must follow ISO 42001, but I think the main argument is a lot of the core components of ISO 42001 align very, very neatly with the Act. It's quite interesting to see as well in the Act, there is actually a section on conformity assessment. So it does actually talk about the need for an organisation to have a management system. Now, it doesn't explicitly mention this standard, but I think anybody who is familiar with the concept of management systems will know that ultimately they are developed and issued by ISO. So I think my point is there's a very, very close alignment. I'm not going to make the claim that implementing 42001 by default makes an organisation fully compliant, but it certainly gives them the, I guess, the foundation to build on. Very much like, for those of you who are familiar, if you remember when GDPR was coming into place back in 2018, ISO 27001 and 22701. That's right, isn't it? The privacy standard that came along basically took an organisation a long way to compliance, and I think that to me is going to be the case here as well.
Yeah, just let me add some point to the history. So the EU AI Act was prepared for quite a long time. It was like starting in 2019, early 2019 until now, currently 2024. It was firstly published in March this year, and it was there was a voting actually by some end of May this year. It will be applicable, however, starting from 2026. And I would say that this act is telling us what the companies have to prepare in order to demonstrate that AI systems they are selling or they are applying cannot harm the people. Yeah. However, this is a vast majority of documentation of requirements the company have to fulfill. And when I was reading the act, I was for the first time I was thinking how that would be possible to manage. Yeah, this is really huge amount of documentation that the companies need to prepare. Similarly, very comparable to somewhat like 27,000 or to information security. There is vast majority of documentation, processes, governance, procedures, tasks, evidences that the companies have to have on file. How they should be able to organize all that stuff. And the ISO norm, the ISO 42001, is giving us a sort of a sort of a cabinet with a lot of small drawers, where the companies may be able to put in some documents, a policy, and evidence, and some definition of the organization. In order, if they would like to require this, they quickly and fastly can take this out or can find it and localize it. Yeah, for example, very similar, like Graeme already said with GDPR. The GDPR has another norm, 27701. And here we have a same relationship. We have an act, the EU AI Act, like we had a GDPR, and we have a corresponding ISO norm, ISO standard. Whereas I have to say that the compliance with the standard will not give you a compliance with the respective law. Like if you have a management system for data protection in place, that does not mean necessarily that you are complying with GDPR. The same here, if you have implemented that cabinet, yeah, where you can put the information, you still might have this cabinet completely empty. So just implementing the management system does not give you the confidence that you will be compliant automatically with the AI Act. However, implementing the management system, and that is a benefit of all management system, will give you the transparency and the good overview of all your documentation and evidences that you need to demonstrate in order to, or that you need to have in place in order to demonstrate compliance with the EU Act.
Yeah, that was important information, Graeme and Roman. Now let's discuss a bit about the challenges that might arise. So, will there be ISO IC 42001 implementation challenges, and which will be the most appropriate way to ensure compliance with the European Union AI Act via the ISO IC 42001?
The best or the biggest shortcoming in ISO standards, which I foresee, is that ISO standards are not mandatory, are not obligatory in the majority of countries. Yeah. So, for example, it would be challenging from my point of view to convince the companies to implement the norm. The most companies will probably try to implement the EU AI Act directly without taking care about the ISO norm. Yeah, that would be a challenging. So the most challenge from my side, from my view, would be to convince the companies to get onto the norms. They will do it initially solely for the act, and probably they will come back at some point in time later when they going to start recognizing that such a diverse set of requirements defined in the AI Act can hardly be overlooked without having a solid and structured management system in place. That management system will be provided by the ISO 42001. Another challenge would be to have a certification bodies in all the EU countries in place that would be accredited by the local accreditation bodies. Exemplarily, I'm coming from Germany, and here in Germany, we are very focused on data protection, on all the data protection requirements. However, we still do not have a single certification body accredited by the German accreditation service who could certify in Germany according to the 27701. Yes, you could get a certification or whatever proof that you are GDPR compliant, yes, but not against the 27701. Still yet, that's a pity. And that is what I foresee could also happen with the new ISO 42001 standard. Graeme.
Yeah, and I think there's some excellent points there. And on that, not just on the certification body front, but I also think on the resourcing front as well, having enough professionals in the field who are sort of familiar with the standard. I think that will take some time to happen. I think in terms of convincing organisations to adopt 42001, I suspect what will happen is, regardless of the EUI Act, I think there's two things that probably will happen. One is other countries will start to introduce legislation as well, which may force the issue. But often the adoption of ISO standards is usually quite often commercially driven. So I think once there's a growing awareness in the market, I think that and customers start demanding that their suppliers align to this, I think that'll be interesting. But from a challenges point of view, one of the things that struck me when sort of working through the standard is it's quite multidisciplinary. So what I mean by that is, with ISO 27001, of course, it's very clear it's focused on information security, or if you take 22301, focus on business continuity. When you look at the AI management system, particularly in the annex, there's all kinds of different things in there around privacy, ethics, security. There's even arguments about environmental matters, because this is about running what the EU would call responsible AI. And so for me, to build an ISO 42001 management system, whoever's leading the implementation, they're certainly going to need input from a whole bunch of different disciplines, different people with different expertise. So there might be a lot more work to do culturally in an organization to maybe break, if you're working in a very silo-based organization, to break down those barriers, because I'm going to have a lot of different input and perspectives to build this effectively. So I think that's certainly one. I think the other is there is a particular section in the annex about what we call the system life cycle. So we're getting very much into the realms of sort of the software development life cycle here, and how those developers interact with AI models. That will require, from a resourcing point of view, access to quite specialist knowledge and expertise. So I think a big challenge that an organisation will need to think about when they're designing their management system is where that expertise is going to come from, especially for some of those topics where we're going to need to delve into some quite specialised areas. So those for me would be the two from a practical point of view of getting this implemented. I think to the second part of the question, the appropriate way to ensure compliance via ISO 42001, I'm sure somebody must be working on this, but it kind of crossed my mind when I was looking through the AI Act. A lot of it does map actually quite nicely with many of the clauses in 42001. So whether I've got homework or somebody else has got homework to do, but I think actually doing a mapping exercise at the start of your project, I think will certainly go a long way, because if we see with ISO 27701, for example, there's an annex in the back where it's completely mapped to GDPR. So you can see as you go through how you're fulfilling those requirements. So I think an exercise like that would be very, very helpful, because as I've said, I think many of the activities, conducting the system impact assessment, embedding decision making in the system lifecycle, and dealing with data quality, there are a few of the things in 42001 that directly correlate with the EUI Act. So don't try and treat it as two separate projects, would be my advice. Let's have one project where we focus on satisfying both sets of requirements, because there's so much overlap. So yeah, that would be my sort of initial thoughts on this question here.
Yeah, the points you've discussed are, I think, are crucial to understanding the challenges. Now, I'd like to move the discussion to the next question, which is in regards to trends. So what trends do you foresee in the intersection of European Union AI Act compliance and fulfillment of ISO IC 42001 in the coming years?
Yep. So if you want me to jump in on that one,
Yeah.
too, then
Sure.
yeah, sure. So there was three things that kind of struck me a little bit about both the AI Act and the standard itself. And one of the biggest things in Article 4 of the EU AI Act, it talks about the need to have what's called AI literacy. And what they mean by AI literacy is if we are an organization, whether we're deploying an AI product to market, which is the main target, the EU AI Act, or we're utilizing AI, there's a kind of requirement there to ensure all our people, our employees, have a full sort of understanding of how AI works and how the AI model works. Now, that sort of correlates with the fact that in ISO 42001, and indeed all ISO standards, there's a very clear requirement for competence and ensuring that you have people who are competent and skilled. And I can see the need for more training and education at all levels. I'm talking from user level right through to sort of professional. Is going to be a trend that affects both of these. So that would be my first one, that the trend towards education, ensuring that people in general are much more literate than they are today about AI. I mean, if you just take the time to look at the media, there's for all the good articles, there's certainly, with all due respect, a lot of nonsense out there as well, which I think we need to tackle. The second one is in both, there is a focus on risk management. But as I was saying in my last answer, risk management that's a lot more broad. So rather than focusing on one topic, such as are we deploying an AI solution with adequate security controls or adequate privacy controls, we're now being asked to think about societal impacts. What would the impact on wider society be of the product that we're about to launch? What potentially could be environmental impacts, for example, as well, many different things. And I think this multidisciplinary approach to risk management is certainly going to be a trend that this Act and this standard, I think, is going to trigger. I mean, it's happening already. Many organizations, of course, have enterprise risk management and look at risk from multiple angles. But now I can see the need to look at risk from multiple angles in a much more granular detail. So that would certainly be another thing. And the last one for me is since we've had sort of GDPR land and we've had requirements for privacy appear all around the world, there's been more and more of a focus on data governance. In other words, ensuring high standards of data quality and trustworthiness and asking about the way in which we process data. And within the standard in Article 10, we've got the whole section about data governance, which also appears in 42001. And it says, we have to be confident in the type of data that we're using to train the model, that we have to have a confidence in the quality of that data. In particular, there's a lot of talk at the moment, quite rightly, about the risks associated with biases in AI systems. In other words, what data are these AI systems being trained on? And that's one area of big concern. And I think a lot of organizations are working to address that. So I think the focus on those areas is probably another relevant trend that will start to gather momentum as we progress here. So for those three, for me, are probably the standouts from looking at both the Act and the standard together.
These are great things and great trends that you've foreseen. I hope this is coming true, Graeme. Generally, from my point of view, I just have a general trend that I see that in the last time, more and more really complex and complicated regulations, legislations are issued by the European Union that require some definition of additional ISO norms or standards, or some other documents explaining these norms to the companies, to the people in the companies that shall understand those norms in order to be legally compliant to these, or to who probably have to ensure compliance. And those norms are really good tools in order to translate the legal language from the Act into a practical language of a company who, or of a company manager who has to work to ensure compliance with that regulation. But maybe he has not enough lawyers, or the lawyers are not so competent to read and explain this law. So I foresee that in future cases, for more and more laws will be issued, more new ISO norms that help to translate this. And maybe having a parallel between what happened to the GDPR when we have afterwards we had the 27701 issued, and what we had with various security laws where we had ISO 27001 adopted to these. What I foresee in addition is that other software development companies would issue some tools onto the market for ensuring the compliance with the AI Act. And those tools hopefully will be based on ISO 42001. This is a trend. Okay.
Okay, that's great explanation. Thank you. Now I'd like to hear your thoughts on how organizations already certified against any integrated management system, like the most common ones, ISO 9001 or ISO 27001, benefit from integrating ISO IC 42001 to streamline processes and improve the overall efficiency.
Just let me start. It's basic content or context on the integrated management system. So the integrated management system have been defined such that they have a very similar structure all over, and they also require or request to have similar supporting tools. Like they have a common structure, they enforce a common structure for policies. They enforce a common structure for having roles defined and responsibilities of these roles. All of them or most of them require to have some sort of risk management on file. They all require some document control being in place for policy, at least policies, procedure, or any other control documents. They all, most of them require some sort of incident management and any other areas or structures that is. And 42001 is not an exemption. It's also an integrated management system, which is very similar to whatever is mentioned here in the question, either 9001, 27001, 22301 for business continuum management, etc. And that is what I think is would be the benefit for the organizations if they already have a quality management system, information security management, business continuum, data protection management system. That would be an easy game for them because they can reuse the risk management, the document controls, the roles and responsibilities, and the structures of policies, such that implementing an additional management system like 42001 would just be a halfway or a half would require just half efforts for those organizations. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think no, some excellent points there. Yeah, the way I did, as you described, Roman, you know, the commonality between these standards. The way I tell this is if I printed out a copy of 9027 and 42001 and laid it on the desk in front of me, I'd find pretty much clauses 4 to 10 are exactly the same. What's different is the annexes in each of those, the subject matter areas. So for me, exactly, if an organization already has a management system that's proven to be working, that's certified, and that organization is in the business of deploying, using, managing AI systems, and obviously they want to demonstrate their care, if you like, their due care and due diligence in that area, then I don't think it's a huge leap to become 42001 compliant, because as you've said, all the base work of the management system should already be in place. Now, of course, one of the things they're going to have to do is to revisit the scope of their management system potentially and say, okay, does the AI part, so let's say I've got a 27001 ISMS covering certain systems and processes in my organization. The question would be, if I want to extend my management system to 42001, is that applicable everywhere? So there may be some scoping work to do, to think about a little bit. But assuming scope's pretty much aligned, then yeah, I don't see it being a big leap. The other major thing we would have to do is define our objectives for the AI management system part of this. So if we're saying, okay, we're going to extend an existing management system now to include this, let's say our existing management security, we might have security objectives. Well, what AI management system objectives are we going to add to that? So there'll be certainly some tweaks to do, but you've already got the building blocks there if you've been working with other management systems. And one of the other big benefits, if certification is the aim here, and you're running one integrated management system, including this standard, when it comes to being certified, often that reduces cost. It reduces a certain amount of audit times. The whole external audit process becomes much more efficient. And certainly, yeah, there are a number of organisations that I, have done work with recently who, I could certainly see them benefiting from making those adjustments to bring 42001 into the fold. But it certainly doesn't need to be a separate project, so to speak. So yeah, I think you've hit on the key points for me.
Okay. Now let's address the next question. How does compliance with ISO IC 42001 standard aid organizations in anticipating and adapting to the current and potentially forthcoming AI regulations?
So if you're happy for me to start, there's two things that I would say here. The first, and I apologize to everybody because it's almost like talking about GDPR again or giving a history lesson, but if we look back at that, there's a bit of precedent really. So obviously we saw sort of in 2017, in the run up to GDPR coming, a lot of organizations trying to adjust and become aligned. We saw GDPR, of course, come into action. And what we basically saw after that is many other countries around the world started to develop legislation which is very similar. And I can speak from first-hand experience, for example, of working in the Middle East and other places where we saw not the same legislation, obviously, but very similar legislation appear. And the point is that by those organizations, in my opinion at least, that had management systems in place, in other words, they had defined processes, risk management, incident management, all of those key building blocks, they seem to be far more geared up to handle those new pieces of legislation as they kind of landed. I can think of one example where I worked with a multinational who works in many countries, quite complex regulatory landscape that was becoming more complex over time, but they weren't too fazed by it because they had the building blocks in place to adhere to a lot of legislation. And I think that's going to be the case here. In other words, yes, we know the AI Act is there, the EU AI Act. It's definitely going to happen elsewhere. You're going to have the fundamental building blocks in place by having a management system. The second thing on the question which says anticipating, that's interesting because one of the things that ISO management systems ask us to do when we look at the clauses on context of the organization is to look at what it calls internal and external issues. So ISO management systems encourage us to be regularly reviewing external issues. And what we mean by external issues is events that are happening in the world, political events, economic events, but in context of this question, upcoming legislation. So we're almost forced, if you like, by having a management system to think about what legislation is coming, depending on where in the world we're working. So I think, to my point, we don't have a crystal ball, but it'll certainly help us make sure we regularly are looking at what's happening. And we're going to be in a position where we have the tools and the building blocks to adjust fairly easily. And I can't predict the future, but I don't anticipate myself other legislation appearing around the world that would be wildly different from the EUI Act. We typically find the EU, in terms of their legislation, tend to be the leaders, and I wouldn't like to see other countries follow. That's not fair, but they kind of set the baseline, and everything else around it is pretty similar. So I think, those would be my two main points about this one.
So from my side, it's actually the no response to this question, but just having in mind that through the compliance with the ISO 42001 standard, solely that the compliance with that standard will not ensure that the company is compliant with the EU AI Act. It's not done by automatically. So just having the management system implemented does not give you that you have all the required documentation and all the processes and the procedural organization and the structural organization in place in order to demonstrate compliance. You just have a management system. You just have defined the system how to manage the document there. But if you did not look deep enough in the AI Act, so you will not be able to achieve compliance by just implementing the standards. So that's the first part of this question. However, the compliance with the ISO norm 42001 will help the organizations to oversee and to manage that all vast of documentation which is required by the EU Act in a more significant way. Because if I have a big problem, and from my point of view, the EU AI Act is a big issue, is a big regulation which requires a lot of things to be implemented. If I have such a big problem and I look for some solution on that, I have to split it into smaller problems, and that is what the ISO norm is trying to do. Is trying to provide me. It provides me a structure. It provides me a structure on how I can split up these problems in many different different pieces and try to solve those pieces individually for the norms context of the organization. I can solve that problem very similar like I did for information security management, for quality management system. If I see the topic on the policy, I have already written a quality policy and information security policy. That would be a very easy game, or rather easy game for me to draw or to write another AI policy. So I can solve all the individual items which in turn, the ISO norm says to me that if you have solved all that individual items, they will be able to play together in a way that that the solution of the big problem of the compliance with the big and huge AI Act can be achieved in an efficient way.
Okay, thank you for your answers. Now, as for the last question, let's discuss a bit about the social impact. So, what social impact does the certification of ISO IC 42001 have, and how does it influence communities and stakeholders?
If I may start on this question, to say just say that currently people do not completely understand AI. They do not completely understand technology and the tools. They see strange applications, and in some cases, people try to fear the AI technology. And our public media, television, radio, newspapers, whatever, they do not contribute the right things correctly. They more are distributing fears on the AI instead of peace. Instead of saying AI will help us, AI is here to make our jobs easy. But instead of that, they say AI will make that you will lose your job because AI will take over the job. So they're doing, from my point of view, not really the right things now, distributing fear. So that's why currently there is no widespread trust in AI technologies and AI tools currently. Yeah? So the compliance with the EU AI Act, which should be based on ISO 42,001, that would be that probably will provide the companies the tools to demonstrate to the stakeholders, to the communities, to demonstrate that they are aiding, that they are driving AI in a transparent way, such that our communities can gain trust again into AI tools, into AI technologies. That is what could be improved. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting points you make there, particularly about the general sort of public feeling potentially towards AI, because, as you say, a lot of media coverage and so forth. That said, I do believe there are genuine questions that AI organizations producing AI solutions need to answer. There are genuine societal concerns if we think particularly about, as I've mentioned already, bias, data privacy, and potential environmental impacts of AI systems. So I think some of the concerns that are raised are genuine ones. And I think providers of AI solutions need to be able to, I guess, answer some of those concerns. And as you've said, it's about trust. It's about demonstrating that actually, we are actually thinking about these problems. We're not waiting until, there's a problem. So I guess an organization that's proactive, goes through certification and so forth, is definitely going to demonstrate to the marketplace that, there's a level of care there. And I think that's the important thing. I would caveat that by saying, obviously, they've got to be clear and transparent about what they've focused on in their management system. But I think definitely having a certification system that people understand and trust and have confidence in, it's not a silver bullet, but certainly I think in terms of allaying some of the fears and giving confidence. I think for this to work in reality, though, we need to make sure that the supply chain, the people who are buying these solutions, actually understand what ISO 42001 means. I think that I've seen that maybe being a problem with other ISO standards, that often there's a misunderstanding of what it is and what it isn't. Like with 27001, some people who obviously are less familiar sometimes associate that with the level of cybersecurity you have and how easy it might be to compromise your system, when we know it's not. It's about the management system. So I think that's an important thing. So there might be a lot of education work to do to bring people up to speed with what this standard is. But I think, yeah, it can certainly go a long way. And if an organization genuinely wants to tackle some of the concerns I've raised there, that we have the tools to do it. And this is the framework that can help us do that.
Thank you for your answers and for this great discussion, Graeme and Roman. I hope that our attendees took away valuable insights that will undoubtedly enrich in their understanding of ISO IC 42001 and its role in artificial intelligence. I know there's a lot more to say and to discuss about this topic, but we do have limited time, so this is why we have dedicated a Q&A session. And I have highlighted some questions we received. And let me see the first one. So it says, what other ML AI related standards do you recommend? So Graeme?
Yeah, so certainly a good question. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest and upfront about this. I have not yet seen from sort of standards bodies, other than 42001, specific technical standards as yet. I'm aware organisations like NIST, for example, sort of examining this area, but there's not a specific standard I can point to. There are, however, some interesting pieces of work in academia, certainly here in the UK, with there's a couple of proposed AI frameworks. One that's sort of focusing on AI ethics, which is from a UK university. So I think what I'd be happy to do is after this is to share those with you, and we can certainly share those with our participants. But in terms of actual technical standards from other organisations, I think there's a lot of stuff in progress, but I've not seen something as prominent as 42001 out there just yet.
Yeah, very similar. Also, from my point of view, I also did not see. There are some framework or some guidelines issued by some universities who are working on artificial intelligence. From my point of view, the ISO 42001 is of such a quality which could not be compared to any other currently existing guideline on machine learning or neural networks, or generally speaking artificial intelligence. So that's why it's so important that we take care about that new issued standard.
Okay, thank you for your answers. Now here's another one. It says, with data protection being fairly ubiquitous across all businesses, adoption of GDPR has been accepted as the required norm to avoid risk and potentially costly data breaches. Many businesses may adopt AI to different levels and complexities based on their needs and the products or services they sell. Do you think this will be a barrier to adoption of ISO 42001 as businesses, especially small businesses leveraging AI to supplement their workforce, will avoid having to implement it unless this is mandatory due to cost of implementation and ongoing management?
Exactly, that was one of the points which I which I mentioned during responding to the main questions. I think that many companies would try to start implementing the compliance with the EU AI Act. However, as I think this is a very huge huge tool or huge law requiring many different and various types of documentation and processes and definitions and policies, whatever, such that those companies will most probably come back to that norm. Well, while they will be looking for a tool to split up that complicated task into some smaller tasks. That's why let the small organization do their mistakes. I would think that the big organization will start implementing that and will show up that it is indeed efficient to implement management systems. Let the small guys do their mistakes and come back later with when we probably will have sophisticated tools in place.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things as well, sort of thinking about this a little bit. So because it's a good question that's being asked, will people adopt it if they're not, in inverted, forced to adopt it? And it's interesting because the EU AI Act is, in terms of its scope, focusing on what, as I said at the start of the conversation, is focusing on what we call high-risk systems. So it's not necessarily going to apply in full to every organization who uses AI. And the difference with 42001 is it can be used by any organization, whether you're a user of an AI system. So let's say we were a bank using AI to do credit scoring or something like that. We may implement 42001 from that perspective as a user of AI. Integrators of AI and developers of AI, 42000 can be applied by any of them, regardless of size. Now, to the point that was asked, I do agree to some degree, without legislation, without a mandatory need to do it, of course, there are going to be organizations and top management in organizations who say, hey, why should I invest in this unless we have to? But that said, what I often find with management system standards is it's the industry that drives this. And what I mean by that is if I go back in time, 10, 15 years and think about the amount of work I was doing with ISO 27001, it was quite limited. Now, the amount of small to medium enterprises in the tech sector in particular that are doing 27001 is quite unbelievable. And that's because the larger upstream players, if you like, are demanding that organizations follow these standards. If you take an example in the UK right now, if you want to do any kind of business involving data with UK government or the public sector, you will need to be ISO 27001 certified. And given the amount of public concern, which we've talked about already, about artificial intelligence, I can only see this going the same way. Now, how quickly the market starts to demand is another question entirely, but I certainly see, in my opinion at least, and whether I'll be proved right or wrong, only time will tell, but I certainly think that's going to be the direction of travel. So I think there'll be plenty of commercial reasons aside from compliance for organizations to pursue this at all levels.
Thank you for your answers. Now, there's another one that says, what's your take on European Union AI Act and ISO 42001 implementation in areas that are outside European Union, but have traffic from interconnected networks, including Europe?
So does that question mean, I presume by the question, and please come back whoever's wrote that, we're talking about maybe the applicability. So if I just talk from my understanding, is even if your organization is not an EU-based organization, all right, so you might be based outside the European Union, if you're providing your product or service to any customer essentially within the EU, or indeed people within the EU are affected by your product, in other words, their data is being processed by your product or utilized somewhere by your product across a network, then the EU AI Act will still apply to that product. So basically, although it's a European Act, it's pretty much going to have a global impact, would be my take. And I can't think of many systems where we can genuinely say it's 100% isolated. Yeah, there may be some cases, but that would be my take from an applicability point of view. So I hope that's what the question meant, but yeah, that would be my thoughts.
I just fully agree, and here you can fully draw the parallel line with the UK being not in the EU, but having adopted a privacy law very similar to GDPR. Switzerland being not in the EU, but having adopted a very similar act in the GDPR. The time actually will show whether the EU AI Act is a good law that will be adopted freely by UK, by the Switzerland, maybe by the US or other countries overseas like Brazil or China or India. Yeah, we'll see. I hope so. I hope at least that they might be issuing similar legislations. And if not, then the international norm, so the ISO standard is an international norm, and 42001 would then be applicable in the US and Canada and Brazil and China and India, as well as it is applicable in the EU. So if they do not have, even if they will not have any AI Act, they might be freely implement the ISO 42001 and comply with the requirements, providing the same level of service also to EU customers and to own or other customers.
Thank you, Roman, and thank you, Graeme. And the last question, it says, what steps should organizations take to prepare for an ISO IC 42001 audit?
To prepare for the audit, yes. Yeah, so we'll assume on the basis of that question then that the organisation has already built its management system to some degree, gone through the implementation process. So if I make that assumption first of all, I would say there's a number of things in terms of preparing. I think that the first thing is to make sure that whoever's leading the implementation, that we do some kind of general compliance review. So maybe, you know, you might call it a little bit of a gap analysis, so walking through each of the requirements of the standard, you know, validating how close you are to compliance, some kind of internal review. Now, obviously, that should be backed up anyway by internal audit, because an internal audit or a program of internal audits is already a requirement of the standard. So I'd say some kind of self-review would make sense. I would certainly recommend, if you have the time and the budget, to do what's called a pre-audit. So pre-audit is where either you can get your certification body or another organisation to come and just do a review and to give an independent opinion about your readiness for the actual certification audit. And the other tips I would have really is, a lot of it to me, preparing for audit is about preparing the personnel. So when you have, because obviously your certification body are going to give you the audit agenda for both stage 1 and 2. So identifying who the best people are to be involved in working with the auditor during the audit. And by best people, I mean people with the right expertise who can share the evidence, and making sure people are prepared. The biggest thing I find not all the time, sometimes as an auditor, what I find is people are nervous sometimes of audits, and they don't quite understand that an audit is, certainly in management systems, not about auditing individuals, it's about looking at processes and whether they're effective. So let's make sure people are at their ease, that they understand what the focus is here, and that they're well prepared. And I think if you invest some time in preparing properly, I think more often than not, you'll have a positive audit experience. So that would be some of the initial points I would think to that question.
Okay, Roman?
Yeah, very similar thoughts on that. Yeah, actually was very complete, Graeme.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for all your questions. And thank you once again, Graeme and Roman, for this wonderful discussion. We will make sure to respond to all the other questions via email and include them in our website alongside the webinar. Thank you to our speakers for this incredible webinar. Thank you for taking the time and for being with us today. We appreciate everyone signing in. For more updates on upcoming webinars, please check out our LinkedIn and Facebook accounts. Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.